Welcome, welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And of course, we are coming to the end of these curses. I don't know if we'll get quite to the end of them, but we'll certainly be very close to the end. And I will say that the curses in Leviticus aren't nearly as awful, although, of course, they parallel the ones in Deuteronomy. But they basically speak, for the most part, about the exile and the emotional state of the Jewish people in going through this and how painful that experience is going to be. The part that is actually quite concerning is the degree to which what is being described here as the abandonment of God on the part of the Jewish people and the abandonment of performing the commandments, etc., unfortunately has its parallels nowadays as well. So it's of concern, I think. But I do want to say, and I think I'm reiterating it, that the fact that we have this blessing and these curses shows the degree to which the Torah wants to know just how much God actually is involved in our lives and in the lives, at least here describing God's relationship to the Jewish people. Not to say that God doesn't have a relationship with other people, that may be also a very precious relationship. But this is the nature of the relationship of God to the Jewish people. And when the Jewish people are not performing the commandments, and part of that purpose of performing the commandments is to, in a sense, be a conduit of the divine into this world, as we've mentioned before, that's a very serious thing because it removes, on one level, the very purpose for which this world was created. So. Going on. Va'avadetem bagoyim, you shall perish, you shall be lost, right? You shall be destroyed. Bagoyim, amongst the nations. Va'achla etchem eretz oivechem. And the subject is eretz oivechem. The land of your enemies will consume you. So Rashi, va'avadetem bagoyim, you will perish among the nations. Keshetiyu bezurim, when you will be scattered. To you avudim zemizeh, you will lose connection one to the other, one from the other. Va'achla etchem, right, to eat, to consume. Elu hamutim bagola, those who will die in exile. It's as if it's consuming them. So he's giving us a way of looking and understanding that way in which the land is going to consume them, these foreign lands. And those who remain amongst you, yimaku ba'avonam, will melt, will pine away in their iniquity, ba'artzot oivechem, in the lands of your enemies. Va'af ba'avonot avotam, and even with the iniquities of their ancestors. Itam imaku, with them, they will pine away. Right, the iniquities that are with them, right, that are held against them. So we'll see. Rashi's going to explain how that exactly works. But avonot avotam, here we are, right? The iniquities of their fathers, of their ancestors, itam, with them, right? So this is from the Sifra that he's getting it. Keshe avonot avotam itam, that is to say, when the iniquities of their ancestors or their fathers are with them. Keshe ochzim maaseh avotehem, that is to say, that when they hold on to the actions of their fathers, bidehem, with their hands. In other words, if they imitate these pernicious practices that were going on in previous generations of Jews, that's what it means. Imaku, lashon hamasa, it has the meaning of melting. Kamo yimasu, as if they, right, as I think, yeah, they will melt. So instead of yimaku, yimasu, that's how he's saying it. Rashi, Uchamohu, and this is similar to Zechariah chapter 14, which, if you're familiar with that, it's actually Haftarah, and it describes what sounds like atomic warfare. Timakna bechorehem. In other words, their eyes will melt in their sockets. And also in Psalm 38, Nimaku chaburotai, my wounds melt, my wounds exude, I think would be the way we could translate that. So it's really very, very sad. V'hitvadu et avonam, they will confess their iniquities, ve'et avon avotam, and the iniquities of their ancestors, b'ma'alam, with their fraudulent practices, lim'ol ma'al, is to practice fraud, especially in connection with the personal use of sacrificial food, etc. Hashem ma'alu bi, in which they defrauded me. And even how they went with me, they carry in this offhanded kind of way. So I'm going to say something which I realize is a very tough thing, and I hope I can say it properly, and it's something that concerns me, and it has to do with, forgive me, bar and bat mitzvahs. Bar and bat mitzvahs are supposed to be a moment of responsibility where a young person is taking on the responsibility of now observing divine commandments. And I remember a wonderful woman back in St. Louis who used to say that the definition of a good bar mitzvah is when the family shows up at shul the next Shabbos. And and how it's become sort of a celebration of the self to that degree. And that's not to say that there are many really wonderful elements to the bar mitzvah itself, that at least it keeps a family, at least prior and up to the bar mitzvah, connected to the synagogue. But the idea that it's a graduation away from the synagogue and a graduation away from becoming committed to Jewish practice and is a source of concern. And this is this offhanded element that it's describing here. And I know that I don't like saying this. I really don't. It's too easy to be critical of others and not to be critical of myself and my own behaviors. But it is a source of concern, and it's wonderful, I have to say, because I've also seen moments with families where it becomes a natural part of a family's practice to celebrate this moment and also to see it as something that becomes part of a family's relationship to the Jewish people and to their worship of the divine. So forgive me, I hope you will, for sharing that. So this carry, the word mikre means like a happen chance, right? That it's just happened without purpose. So that our relationship with our Creator needs to be mindful. It can't be just casual. So Carrie has this idea of casual. So let's take a look at if there's any Rashi on us. No, not on this one. All right. Af ani elech imam bekeri. I too will go with them, right? So they're treating me in this offhanded, this casual kind of way. I am myself, this is God speaking, of course, will go with them in this casual way. Veheveti otam, and I will bring them, be'eretz oivehem, into the land of their enemies. O az yikana, or then their hearts will be atoned. They will be humbled. Ha'arel, their uncircumcised hearts will be humbled.
Excuse me. Hello?
Yes.
Everybody, can you briefly compare mindful versus casual?
Yes. And mindful means that you're consciously thinking about what you're doing, and you're not just allowing your emotions to govern your actions. It's a term that I learned primarily from the tiny bit of Buddhism that I read, and it struck me as a really wonderful word because very often we allow our emotions to govern our behavior. And so, we may look at things that have very serious consequences as being, in a very casual way because we're primarily looking at the pleasure we're getting from those behaviors or the instant gratification and not thinking about the fact that we may be trading something very precious for that instant gratification that doesn't last very long. And they're people whose lives are based on that. And basically, they're probably very unhappy. And they don't really know why they're so unhappy, except they feel they need to get the next gratifying experience in order to try and stave off the unhappiness they feel. Whereas if they thought carefully about the consequences of their behaviors and perhaps wouldn't do some of the things that they're allowing their emotions to govern them, they might feel they might actually discover joy. Again, gratitude isn't something automatic. Gratitude is something that you have to develop. And being able to look at your life and the many little pieces of it that are actually miraculous and wonderful. And one of the things you learn is sometimes things that you become you feel entitled to when those things aren't happening anymore, right? Because if you're blessed and life is easy, sometimes you think that's just the way life has to be. And as you get older, you discover that isn't the way life has to be, but that in fact you're very privileged for many, many things. Um, I like to say, even just getting out of bed in the morning is an incredible privilege because there are many people who are unable to do that, and there are many people who will not wake up today. And to see and break down your life and think about it. That's the mindfulness, to use your mind to think about these things as opposed to your emotions. Mike, did you want to follow up at all on that? Is that helpful?
Oh, I think maybe it's like emotional versus analytical. So,
Well, I don't want to necessarily, we are emotional and our emotions are very important, but we have to train our emotions. We are capable of learning how to train our emotions and not let them control us. Uh,
but we have to use higher levels of thinking for
that is correct. So I love to say that the subtext of the Torah itself is doing what doesn't come naturally. Because very often what we do naturally is actually self-destructive. We have to balance it. Have to be able to balance it.
right, right.
That takes
Okay,
mindfulness. That takes mindfulness. Yeah. Okay. So thank you
okay.
for asking the question. It's an important point. Okay. Let's see where we are. Okay. So we're on 41, and here we go, right? So in other words, when their hearts are humbled, right? They no longer feel entitled, right, to these things, right? Veheveti otam, so I shall bring them. And this is Torat Kohanim, this is the Sifra, a Midrash, halachic Midrash. Ani ba'atzmi, I myself, this is God speaking, of course, aviem, I myself will bring them. And the comment is Zo midah tova Israel. This is actually a good thing that God is saying these things, even though, of course, he's saying he's taking them into this exile, etc. But it actually is something good. It's a good quality for the Jewish people. Shelio hiyu umrim, that they shouldn't say, Ho'il, since the galinu ben ha'omot, since we have been exiled amongst the nations of Odei Elohim, of idolaters, na'aseh k'ma'asehem. We should do what they are doing. In other words, sort of, I think what it's saying here is that, thinking that since this is where we have been taken, maybe that's what we should be doing. We now that we're under their influence and in their culture, we should be following exactly what they're doing. Ani eni manichem. It says, but because God is present there with them, this is God, eni manichem. I'm not going to allow them to do this. Ela ma'amid ani et nevi'ai, but I will set up my prophets, umachziram letachat kanfei hashchina, and I will bring them back under the wings of the divine presence. And there's this quote from Ezekiel now, chapter 20, and I put the English here, which I'll take a look at it in a second, right? V'ha'oleh al ruchacham, and that which arises on your spirits, hayo lo tihiyeh, right? It will not come about. It will absolutely not come about, etc. Chai ani, this is God making a vow, etc. Imani lo b'yad chazaka, if I do not with a strong hand, etc. And the entire verse says, and that which comes into your mind shall not be at all. And this is what it means, that you say, we will be as the nations, as the families of the land, to serve wood and stone. As I live, says the Lord, surely with a mighty hand and with an outstretched arm and with fury poured out will I be king over you, etc. So the fact, what Rashi's explaining through the Sifra, right, is that God saying that God himself will be there is to prevent us from becoming idolaters ourselves. At least we hope so, right? Or as yikana, or then will be humbled. So, Kamor, and this is similar to in Exodus chapter 23, where we're talking about a goring ox, or noda kishor nagachu im az yikana. So it says, and if a person realizes that the ox they have is a goring ox, because if there's a difference, if an ox gores a person and kills them, right? There's the person who owns the ox is not necessarily up for considered to have committed a capital offense. Or if an ox kills another ox, right? It's not necessarily seen in the same way as if the ox is known as a goring ox, because it's happened, I think, 3 times that this ox has gored another ox. And at that point, the owner of the ox has to take additional precautions to prevent this from happening. And so there's a difference in a case where the ox is known as a goring ox or the ox is not, had been established as a goring ox, the level of precaution that the owner is supposed to take and is therefore responsible. And so the amount of damages that the owner is responsible for if the ox gores another ox is greater than if it isn't known as a goring ox. So at any rate, Azikana is then he is humbled, and I assume it means, that the owner, I think, is going to take additional precautions. Lashon acher, another interpretation. Ulai shema asa, that in a way it's saying, perhaps, right? In that case, their azikana levana, that their hearts will be humbled. In other words, having experienced this pain and this suffering that they've had in exile. Va'az yitzu et avonam, right? Then the iniquity will be appeased. Yichapru will be atoned. Al avonam, they will find atonement for the iniquity, be surehem, in the tribulations that they face. So at this point, we're going to go we're going to keep going, right? So there it is. Here, this now is a positive turn. V'zacharti et priti Yaakov. At this point, I will remember my covenant with Jacob. Va'af et briti Yitzchak, and also my covenant with Isaac. Va'af et briti Avraham eskor, and I even my covenant with Abraham I will remember. Va'aretz eskor, and I will remember the land. Right. So this is sounding like there's a little bit of a turn, a positive turn in the midst of these curses. So what's interesting here, okay, is that there is the reverse. Normally it's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Here it's Jacob, Isaac, and Abraham. So that's one point Rashi's going to comment on. And then there's this verb, v'zacharti, I will remember. And it says, remember, God says he'll remember the covenant with Jacob, but it doesn't say he'll remember the covenant with Isaac. And then it goes on to say that God will remember the covenant with Abraham. So why is that mentioned, that verb, I will remember, left out? Judith, please, go ahead.
The question is about remembering,
Yes.
because it's like, well, did we slip God's mind and now God is paying attention again?
Oh,
What does
okay.
that really mean?
No, I think that's a great question. I think it's a literary device to say that, you know, that despite all that's been going on, that this covenant that God made with the patriarchs will come into effect. That what seeing the possible humbling of the Jewish people, that God will fulfill the promises, will start a process possibly of fulfilling the promises he made to the patriarchs. So I don't know that it's necessarily that God forgot. It's just that given the dynamics of what's going on and the level of of iniquitous behavior on the part of the Jewish people, that it overrides the merit of the patriarchs. So that if the Jewish people start to listen, so if you think of this as a scale, right, with the merit and the promises to the patriarchs in the one side of the scale, and the iniquities of the Jewish people on the other side of the scale, right? That the iniquities are so heavy that they're not able to balance the merit of the patriarchs. And we have this concept of zechut avot, the merit of the patriarchs, to make up to a degree for the level of faithlessness that we have, and the sins that we commit as a people, so that there aren't these terrible consequences. And what's happened here is that there's been such a practice away from God and away from God's commandments that the merit of the patriarchs and these promises can't balance the disastrous consequences that are happening. So it's not that necessarily, I think, Zacharti here could be, and I will take into account, so that now these things can operate and balance things. So that's really what I think it's trying to say here. And this idea, I think, is actually quite a beautiful concept of how connected we are to previous generations, instead of an attitude of, forgotten, gone and forgotten. And of course, you know that these days, I believe saying Shema Yisrael, I'm actually addressing Jacob. I'm actually saying to the last of the three patriarchs, who's also, of course, known as Israel, that the God that he considered his Elohim is my God too. So there's this, I don't know that it's exactly ancestor worship. I wouldn't go that far, but I think there's something very powerful in not sort of having this gone and forgotten kind of attitude to life, and to recognize just to what degree we stand on the shoulders of previous generations. And again, of course, reflecting an attitude of appreciation and gratitude, and not forgetting it for what they did. And of course, having that again sort of pushes against this idea of entitlement. So I hope that's helpful. All right, so let's go on to here. This is a lovely Rashi, by the way. This is the Rashi we're going to do is memorable, right? V'zacharti et briti Yaakov. I will remember my covenant with Jacob. So we know he notices the word Yaakov is normally not not spelled with this vav, right? It says here, right? Malay vav, right? It's spelt in a full way where the or sound is using a vav. And normally when it comes to names generally, Hebrew, the convention in Hebrew is to leave out the vowel letters. So Yaakov generally is spelled without this vav, and that's what Rashi is going to comment on. B'chamisha makomot, there are 5 places, nichtav malay, where it's spelled with this vav, 5 places. Eliyahu, and the word Elijah, chaser, is missing it, meaning that the vav is missing from Eliyahu. So it's just Eliyah. And the chaser b'chamisha makomot, and there are 5 places where the name Elijah is missing the vav. And the midrash is Yaakov natal ot mishmo shel Eliyahu. So we know that Elijah is supposed to foreshadow, the messianic era. And it's saying that Jacob took a letter from the name of Elijah, Ervon, as security, as a pledge. Excuse me, I need to put an L in there. As a pledge, Sheyavor, that Elijah should come, Vivaser Geulat Banav, and to foretell, right, and announce the redemption of his children, of his descendants. So it's a beautiful literary allusion to the idea of how of great concern. We know that generally speaking, parents have a love of their children that is just really profound. So that's the idea I think going on here, this connection to Elijah. V'zacharti it briti Yaakov, and I shall remember, or take into account, right, my covenant with Jacob. Lama nimnu achoranit. In other words, why are they being counted, that is the patriarchs, backwards in reverse order? Klomar. So what it's saying is, Kidai hu Yaakov hakatan. So Jacob, that is to say, that Jacob is worthy, he is sufficiently worthy, who, even though he's the third in line, right? Lacha, okay. So maybe it's saying that the worthiness of Jacob is small, right, compared to Isaac or Abraham. Lachach, and for this reason, ve'im eino kidai, that if Jacob's merit is not sufficient, harei Yitzchak imor, you can count Isaac with him. Ve'im eino, and going further, step further, right? Eino kidai, and if the two of them are not sufficiently worthy, harei Avraham imor, you can count Abraham along with him. Shehu kidai, that he is sufficiently worthy. So, in other words, there are all 3 of them moving from Jacob, who is of a lesser degree than Isaac, who is of a lesser degree than Abraham, and that's why it goes that way. That regardless, God is going to find a level of worthiness for the redemption of the Jewish people. Velama lo ne'emra zechira b'Yitzchak. And I mentioned that it doesn't mention that God will remember Isaac. It mentions God remembering with Jacob. It mentions God remembering with Abraham, but it doesn't say this about Isaac. Ella, so why not? Afaro shel Yitzchak, that the ashes of Isaac near Lefanai are seen before me. This is if God is saying that Isaac's ashes are lying before me, collected, savur, umunach al hamizbech, and placed on the altar. And of course, that is a reference to the Akedah, right? The binding of Isaac. That act was such an act of self-sacrifice. Mike, I want to recognize you. Yes.
Oh, hi. And I noticed Elijah is prominence in Judaism. Does he is he in he's coming back obviously, and this reminded me of
Yes.
things about Christianity, him coming back.
Sure. Sure.
Is Elijah, but I haven't seen Elijah in Christianity. Have you?
Yes. I know for a fact that John the Baptist is supposed to be an incarnation of Elijah.
Okay, so they expect him to
You
come
look at
back and
John the
things that.
Baptist's personality, etc. His personality is very similar to John the Baptist's.
What about in Islam?
That I don't know. I don't know enough about Islam with regards to that and what their sense of future time is. I'm not familiar with that at all. So
Okay,
I don't know if Islam talks about a messianic era. Okay.
but John the Baptist didn't live at the same time as Elijah, right? I mean,
No, no, no. John the Baptist lived during Roman times. I said he's supposedly an incarnation of Elijah because
they
he's
so
the
the,
one, remember, who baptizes Jesus. And he precedes and announces the coming of the Messiah. He basically announces
oh,
Jesus' coming.
so the Christians are saying Elijah already came, and the Jews are
Yes,
saying he
that is
hasn't come yet.
correct. That is correct. Yes, yes. Right. They believe in a second coming. We say he hasn't come yet. But then there are other elements of Christianity which are not Jewish in terms of the divine nature of Jesus, right? That they consider Jesus to be God incarnate. And I realize there are probably many Christians who don't hold like that at this point. But at least classically, that is part of the Nicene Creed. So, yeah. That, in fact, so it was a discussion, a point of discussion up until the Council of Nicaea that put it to bed.
The Christians are saying that's only the first time Jesus came. It's not that the Messiah
Correct.
came. It's not the
Correct.
second time. So how does that make sense?
Well, no, no, no. They're saying they're waiting for Jesus to come again. They're waiting for that time with the Messiah. But
Well,
like I
what,
said,
but
yeah, go ahead.
the Messiah did come already. I mean, it doesn't make sense how they can say that was you know what's his name? I
Jesus,
forget. I don't know the other guy.
John the Baptist,
I forget. Yeah, the Jewish version,
Elijah?
Elijah. Yeah, I mean Elijah's not supposed to come yet. Wait,
No,
I don't see
right.
how they made it
They felt that John the
harmonized with.
Baptist, because they felt John the Baptist was Elijah. That's how they see it.
Yeah, but how do they make that harmonized with Judaism, where Elijah is not the Messiah hasn't come yet, and Elijah
That they
when the
think
Messiah
Jews are
before the Messiah.
wrong. They think Jews have made a mistake. They feel that Jews did not recognize when the Messiah came, and that there is actually a second coming. By the way, this is something that I learned a long time ago, that there's a Messiah, son of David, and there's another Messiah who I don't recollect. That is within Jewish tradition. There is a notion of two messiahs. So there's
It,
Mashiach ben David, but there's also, Mashiach ben Yosef. That's right. There is, because of the fact that there were, the split in the kingdom, the northern kingdom of Israel, the 10 tribes, and the southern kingdom of Judah. There is within Jewish sources a notion of a failed Messiah. There is, interestingly enough, and that's the Mashiach ben Yosef. And of course, who's Jesus's father? What was his name? Joseph.
nobody knows,
Joseph.
but that was his adopted father. Right?
Well, adopted? No, no.
I heard it was a Roman soldier.
Okay. That kind of stuff. Let's not even go there. Okay. Obviously, there are people who are going to try to denigrate. Okay. I'm not a Christian. Okay. But that's primarily because of what Paul did to Christianity in denying the validity of the mitzvot. That's what Paul essentially did.
But okay, so here's my question: so when the next Messiah comes, the Jewish Messiah comes,
Yes.
are the Christians and then the Jews say, okay, here is Jeremiah, right? What's his name?
Elijah?
Elijah, sorry. When Elijah comes, sorry, I was a former atheist. I wasn't a former
It's
Jew.
okay. It's
So
okay.
when Elijah comes,
Yes.
and the Jews say, okay, that was Elijah, what will the Christians say?
They'll say it's the second coming. That's all.
Or they'll
Christians
say,
will
no,
say
that's
it's,
John the Baptist or something,
well,
or
no, it may be a different person. John, it just happened to be in that generation. It was John the Baptist. Look, there are
oh, okay,
Hasidim who believe that their Rebbe is the Messiah incarnate. There are Hasidim who believe that their Rebbe is the Messiah. It's just that the messianic time has not been fulfilled as yet.
I'm just trying to see how the Christians make sense of Elijah.
I don't have a problem. I honestly don't. Right. I mean, if Elijah's coming in and the reason why they mention Elijah is because Elijah didn't die. He went up to heaven in a fiery chariot. That's why he's given this
Like,
particular role.
exactly, that's what I'm trying to explain.
Yeah.
That's what I'm
Okay.
trying to understand,
But
how the
but
Christians
again, but
see
again,
that his
I
return.
don't know. It's not a problem. It's just that Elijah has manifestations, right? And his manifestation back in the times of Jesus was John the Baptist. That's how Elijah manifested himself.
Okay, I think I understand. They'll say it's a
Yeah,
different person or
just
something.
a different name.
Yeah,
Different name. Yep.
because
Okay.
John, it didn't have it could John the Baptist could have been anybody, right?
It could have
That's not
been.
as
Yeah. Elijah
it's
might
not as
appear as
big as
other
figure
people. There might be
as
other
Elijah,
Elijahs. Okay. Elijah may appear in
because
different. Yeah.
Elijah's exactly Elijah's a much bigger figure than John the Baptist, right? I mean, it's talked about.
Well, right. John the Baptist,
That's
as I
right.
said, is just a particular manifestation, a specific manifestation of Elijah.
Yep.
So
See, this is what I meant. Like, oh, if John the Baptist is a manifestation of Elijah, then isn't
yeah.
Judaism in control here?
I don't know what we mean by in control. If you mean by truthful, hopefully, I'm not here to make those judgments necessarily. Okay.
Okay, I'll stop while I'm ahead.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a good idea. And we're going to close for today. So thank you. I'm going to stop the recording.